So who wants to lead? Sarah, you want to lead?
Okay. 86. Sings my soul, my Savior God to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Thank you for being such a good sport.
Thanks for humoring me with the song. I just think any studying we do helps us appreciate God more. Amen.
Amen.
So I realized this morning that I announced the Fireside without defining what I meant by new moon. Hold on, I'm going to minimize this. Okay, here we go. I didn't explain what I meant by new moon. Joshua kind of did, but I hope you didn't think I meant a dark moon. There's nothing interesting about a dark moon to me. When you asked an astronomer, new moon is when the moon's completely dark. That's what you see on the calendar. That's not what I meant at all. We didn't gather this evening to try to observe something invisible. We're going to actually observe something. So I just want to spend a minute clarifying terminology. So this is what a dark moon looks like. You can see it because of the sunlight reflecting off the earth back onto the moon, so it's very dim. It's called earth shine. I think that's a cute name. So to an astronomer, we'll call it the astronomical new moon, or a dark moon, or a no moon, okay? It's what you'll find in a regular calendar, and it's what we'd be trying to see if I had misscheduled tonight's Fireside for last night. But I didn't do that, luckily. Those of us interested in the biblical calendar, we're talking about the biblical new moon. So this is the first tiny sliver of a crescent moon that can be seen a day or two after the dark moon. It's the visible new moon that marks the beginning of the lunar month. It's what you'll find on the Zarahemla Foundation holiday calendar. If you don't have a copy of this, we'd be happy to give you one. It's what we're going to go outside and see this evening. So it's always important to clarify terminology. When I say month, I also mean a lunar month. I don't mean January, February, March, not the Gregorian calendar month. It's kind of like I have to clarify what I mean when I say the word Mormon even, because see, a lot of people that means a member of the LDS church, but I think it means anyone who believes in the Book of Mormon, whether in the church or not. So yes. Oh, and I wanted to mention for the people on Zoom, some of you are somewhere that the sun has set. I know some of my Missouri friends were going to get on. So you can go outside and look for the moon anytime you want. Now, don't wait until we go when the sun sets in about an hour. Yeah.
I have to say, it's anyone who believes in the Book of Mormon who's not in the
Oh, because the church doesn't want the word Mormon anymore. That's still not what I mean. I still mean members of the church. That's funny, though. Oh, yeah. All right. So we're going to go out. I'm going to show you some pictures of new moons now. These aren't necessarily all true first day of the cycle new moons. They're all waxing crescent moons, and I think they're just beautiful. They're a bit of a challenge to see. So the full moon, sorry, I'm blocking your guys' view. The full moon is much easier to see. It's bigger, it's brighter, it's visible all night long, and it can be seen from any part of the sky. It rises in the east, sets in the west, but the new moon is much smaller, it's much dimmer. It's only visible for an hour or so after sunset, and it can only be seen in the west side of the sky, right where the sun just set. So when we go look for the new moon, we always go in well, we don't always go in the same place. We can't see the western horizon from our backyard because of trees, so we usually go in the front yard. Occasionally we get on the roof. That's kind of fun. But you always look in the same place. You always look right where the sun has set. So here's a few. Sorry, it's like a spoiler alert because I don't know what it's going to look like. But you notice some of them are a little more on the right, some are a little more on the bottom. It just depends on exactly where the moon is in relation to the sun, because it's not always the same. All right. I'll stay up on that. Okay, so if we try to see it last night, it would just be a completely dark moon. Tomorrow night, if you go out to look at the moon, you'll see that it's a little bit bigger. And that's because I'm going to try to explain the moon's orbit, and I tend to kind of be repetitive when I'm explaining something, so forgive me. But the
moon's orbit is repetitive.
It's repetitive too. All right, good point. So the Earth is rotating on its axis. This is what causes the days. This is what causes the moon to rise in the east and set in the west, causes the stars to rise in the east, set in the west. It's also why the moon rises in the east and sets in the west. But the moon is also orbiting around the Earth in the same direction that the Earth is rotating. So it's sort of like it's trying to swim upstream. It's like fighting against the rotation of the Earth a little bit. So the moon and the stars move across the sky more quickly than the moon does. But they both, the sun and the stars, what did I say, the moon and the stars? Oh, thank you for correcting me. The sun and the stars move across the sky more quickly than the moon does. But they all, not both, they all rise in the east and set in the west, and then they go on the other side of the Earth, and then they rise in the east, set in the west. They never go the other direction. The sun never does, the moon never does, the stars never do. Okay, so here's what's that?
For Joshua's long day.
It's okay.
What's that?
She's just making a joke.
Joshua's long day, Hezekiah's 15 belts.
Oh, yes, that's true. Okay, so with few exceptions, yes. Okay, so here is a new moon, and by tomorrow night, the moon will have fallen behind the sun a little bit because the sun's going quicker, remember? So because I'm looking at it this way because that's east from my perspective, and since we're in the northern latitudes, the sun's always in the south part of the sky. So it rises in the east, it arcs across the sky in the south, and it sets in the west. And after it sets in the west, and here's the moon, and a little tiny bit is shining, that's the new moon. And then the next night, the moon's going to be a little farther away. A little bit more of it is going to be lit up. And so here is a little bit of a bigger crescent moon. It's called a waxing crescent moon when it gets bigger. Here's a little bigger, a night or two later, as it moves toward what we call the first quarter. And it's a little bit confusing name because it's half the moon is lit up, but we call it first quarter because we're a quarter of the way through the moon cycle at this point. Okay, so moon's orbit. So this is, I guess, where it's going to get a little repetitive. The moon orbits in the same direction as the Earth's rotation, so it appears to move across the sky more slowly than the sun and stars. The moon's orbit is at an angle of 5 degrees to the ecliptic plane. Okay, so the sun has a very fixed place that it can travel, although it does change every day, depending on what day of the year it is. So we say the sun rises in the east. To be very precise, it only rises at due east on the equinoxes. In the winter months, it rises south of east, and in the summer months, it rises north of east because it's in a little different place every day. And it's also at a little different time every day, but it's very precise. The moon is very regular and precise as well, and it basically follows the same path of the sun, but it does have that 5 degrees it can play with because the orbit cuts the Earth's orbit around the sun at a 5-degree angle. This is why there aren't eclipses every single month. So when we say there's a conjunction of the moon with the sun, it's probably not a true solar eclipse. It's probably just where the moon is close to in between, so it's gonna get that month, but it's going to be a little bit below or a little bit above. So there we go. The moon makes it all the way around the Earth in 27.3 days. But that is not what we see because as the Earth is also orbiting around the sun, in that 27.3 days, the Earth has moved. And so now, even though the moon has gone all the way around, the moon has to catch up a little so that it looks the same in the sky to us. And it takes an extra 2.2 days. So here's an illustration to try to show it. This is from my favorite astronomy book. It's written by H.A. Ray. This is the same one I showed if you took my stargazing thing at Tabernacles last year. It was the same book. So this is his cute little illustration. This is the guy that illustrated Curious George. So let me pull up the wrote and illustrated, that's right, and his wife did some of them too. Okay, so here's the new moon, and here's the little guy that's viewing it. There's the sun way over in the distance, okay, and this is the direction of the Earth's orbit around the sun. It's the same direction as the moon's orbit around the Earth. It's the same as the Earth's rotation. It's the same as the moon's rotation. It's the same as the sun's rotation. Like the whole solar system just seems to kind of be moving in this, as viewed from the north, like a counterclockwise direction. It's almost like somebody did that on purpose. I don't know. So anyway, here's the new moon. Somebody viewing the new moon. And then as the moon orbits, here it is being lit up. And the person on Earth can see half of it. So there's that first quarter. And then the moon continues to go around. And now you can see the full moon. And it's visible at night because the whole thing's lit up. And so it's not sharing the sky with the sun at all. And here it is at the last quarter, and then it comes back around to new moon. Now, at this point right here, it's come around to being above the same longitude on the Earth, and so it seems like it's done a complete cycle. However, because the Earth has traveled from here to here, the sun is shining at a different angle. So now the moon has to go a little tiny bit more to fully catch up to the sun. And so that's where the 29.5 days comes from. That is what we consider the full lunar cycle. Okay? If that's confusing, welcome to the club. All right. Yes.
So I'm just going to give a small technical. You said rotation was going around the sun. Technically, that's revolution.
I meant to say orbit. The revolution. I don't think I even use the word revolution. Just trying to mess me up. Yes.
Okay, this is gonna be a real stupid question.
Okay.
Just to show how dumb I am when it comes to
Okay.
something. Okay, that looks like Curious George. Is that Curious George?
I think it's a little man. Maybe it's the man in the yellow hat.
Is it a little red in the shadow?
Same illustrator.
It's the same illustrator, but I don't think that's her question.
No, what I'm saying is that that's the little man, and that Curious George is a shadow, and the shadow is on the wrong side, it's towards the sun. Shadow is the guy?
You maybe
There's an axis and
There's an app. There's also a pole.
this pole. Oh, the axis. Oh.
Okay, thank you. I was so confused. I'm like, the shadow is on the wrong side. It's just
That's
really
funny.
bothering me.
And you see the Earth, it's tipped. Oh, I was going to bring the globe in
I
here.
thought that was
Dang it. How did I give me the
the
globe?
axis of the little man, and that Curious George is the
Oh,
shadow.
yeah. Okay. Nope. All right. Moving along. Okay.
Because I'm also blind.
Okay. So we talked about how the moon moves west more slowly than the sun and stars. You can see this pretty dramatically when you're stargazing because the moon gets passed by the stars. This is another little illustration from the H.A. Ray book. So here's the star, and as you are stargazing and watching it, then the star is getting closer to the moon, and then it's gone. It went behind the moon, and then if you keep on stargazing, it reappears because the moon's getting passed by the stars. Now, it's especially fun when the moon isn't full, because even when the moon isn't full, it's still there blocking the stars. Is that blocking it? Oh, that's not a good place to put that. That's an eclipse, that's right. Okay, so the star will go behind the part of the moon that isn't illuminated, so it's kind of weird. So you should try to observe this when the moon isn't full, because when it's full, it's like obvious the star is behind it, but you can't see through the dark part of the moon. All right, so let's talk about the words waxing and waning. So here's couldn't find a good picture of an actual 29 or 30 day lunar cycle. This is pretty close. This is like 23 or something. So as the moon, this is like the first day, the cycle, second day, you can see it getting a little bigger. When the moon is getting bigger, this is what we call waxing. And in the northern hemisphere, when it's illuminated only on the right side, the moon is waxing or growing bigger, okay? When it's illuminated only on the left side, it's because we're in this later part of the cycle where the moon is getting smaller. So once you get to full, which looks like it's right here, then it starts to darken up on the right side. You can see the little pieces of moon, looks like they're missing, and then it's gone. So when it's illuminated only on the left side, the moon is waning or getting smaller. And the word waning means that. The word waxing comes from candle making. Dipping the wick in the hot wax makes the candle slowly bigger and bigger. So it's called waxing. So that can help you remember what those words mean. But here's some little tips to help you too. Waxing, when the light is on the right, it's getting bigger every night. Waning, the only light left is on the left. There you go. The light moves, and it's interesting too, the light moves from right to left the way Hebrew letters do. It goes from right to left, so who knew? Okay, so good, yes.
So to translate right and left to what you're actually seeing in the sky, that means you stand south, stand facing south.
Right.
Look this way.
Exactly, but since we live north of the tropics, it's always it's always this for left and right. If you live close to the equator, it would sometimes be on your right and sometimes on your left, because sometimes you look south and sometimes you look north, but we always look south, so it's always this. So if you're in the southern hemisphere, you have to flip it around, but let's see. Okay. So let's give a little more vocabulary besides the waxing and waning, and that's the phrase, the words crescent and gibbous. So crescent I've already used, you probably know the crescent is when the moon is lit up less than half. Gibbous is lit up more than half. If it's exactly half, that's the first quarter or the last quarter, depending on whether it's waxing or waning. And then of course full is when it's 100%. So here's, so the gibbous is anything between a full moon, a half moon and a full moon on either side. You're just gonna keep them away from it. Okay, so this is how it goes through the cycle. New moon, the astronomical new moon, of course, is when it's dark, and then it goes to waxing crescent, and then first quarter, waxing gibbous, full moon, waning gibbous, last quarter, waning crescent, and then back to the dark moon. Good? Okay. Now, the moon goes through this very regularly, and I feel like probably a lot of you have learned this, and the part that's vastly undertaught is what time of day each of these appears. Because you can't just see any of these moons anywhere in the sky, any time of day. You just have to get lucky kind of thing. Like for instance, you can only see the new moon, the newest crescent moon, for 1 hour after sunset in the western sky. It's very specific. So let's talk a little bit about at what time of day each phase appears. So you can use, once you have a good picture of what's happening in the solar system, you can a lot of times use logic to figure it out. Hopefully you get it right. We're gonna look at some books and movies later that don't get it right. But anyway, hopefully you can see this okay. So here's the Earth viewed from above, above the North Pole, okay? And the sun is over here somewhere shining its rays, basically at a straight line because it's so far away. And this is the day side of the Earth and the night side of the Earth. And the moon also sort of has a day side and a night side. Like Joshua said, half the moon is lit up all the time. It's just a matter of what part we see. Now we do always see the face of the moon. The moon doesn't, we never see the back side of the moon, but it's, you know, looking at the sun differently, and so it's lit up differently. Okay, so starting at this point A right here, if you're on the Earth, you can see it in the daytime, see how it's lit up, and that's the astronomical new moon, and it corresponds down here with a completely dark moon. And then as the moon rotates around the Earth, it comes to this point B right here. So hopefully you can visualize this. We're still in the daytime, and this is what is the waxing crescent. So it rises the new moon, it rises, the dark moon, it rises with the sun. So it rises at sunrise, it travels across the sky with the sun, and it sets at sunset. The waxing crescent rises a little bit later, but it does rise before noon, and it crosses the meridian sometime before sunset, and it sets sometime before, we'll say, midnight, solar midnight. It's not, because of daylight savings and standardized time zones, it's not necessarily midnight on your watch, but say solar midnight, okay? Then the first quarter moon here, you see it's going to be visible from sometimes in the day and sometimes at night. So this is first quarter. It rises around noon and it sets at solar midnight. So you can't see it in the morning. And, right, okay. Hopefully I don't misspeak. Okay, and then this right here, as it orbits around, a few days later, you get to the waxing gibbous. This rises after noon and it sets after midnight, so you also never see it in the morning. And then the full moon, the reason it's full is because it's opposite the sun from the Earth. So the sun's over here, here's the Earth, here's the moon. You're standing during the nighttime on the night side of the Earth here, looking at the moon fully lit up. So the full moon, it rises at the same time the sun is setting. It's It's like the sun's setting over there, the moon's rising over there, and they're like 180 degrees apart from each other in the sky. So you can never see a full moon in the daytime. They don't share the sky. So that's one pickiness about it. Okay, then we move to the waning gibbous here, and then the waning gibbous, let's see. So that's gonna rise later than the full moon, so sometime after sunset, and it's gonna set a little after sunrise. So you can't see it much in the day either, although you maybe could see it in the morning. And then the last quarter right here, it rises at midnight and it sets at noon. So you can only see it in the morning. And then we get to the waning crescent, this H point here. It rises after midnight and it sets sometime after noon. You can't see it in the evening at all, the waning crescent, okay? This is where picture book authors get it, or illustrators, I should say, get it wrong. They draw waning crescents all the time when the kids are being put to bed, and it's just wrong. And then we get back to the dark moon. So anyway, so
Maybe they're Australian.
Yeah.
well, so you have to take that into account, but usually they're not in Australia, maybe. Maybe they're in Australia.
So which one would be the bedtime?
So the bedtime moon is the waxing crescent, so lit up on the right side. That's what you've got to draw. Yeah, and we'll get into that more. I put in my invitation, or in my email maybe, that some of you got, that there's going to be a quiz. I decided to make the quiz an analysis of pictures of moons in children's books. So we'll kind of do that together and see if we can figure out, is this good? Is this not good? And when I set out to do the picture books, I thought we were mostly going to come across left side crescent moons at bedtime in the Northern Hemisphere. But actually, I found a whole bunch of different mistakes, and we'll explore those together in a minute. All right. So just a couple of fun facts before we go on. I mentioned the moon always has the same face towards us. Scientists think it didn't used to, but the Earth's gravity has made it so it doesn't have the power to turn against our gravity anymore. So we really only see half the moon, although technically we see about 51% of the moon because it does have a little bit of a wobble. So you can't see 51% at the same time. You can't ever do that with a sphere, but just, it has a little bit of wobble. So the so-called dark side of the moon, which is really a terrible name because is it really dark? It gets the exact same amount of light except for lunar eclipses, right? Well, not think about that. Kyle always keeps me on my toes, and it never gets a lunar eclipse. So the dark side of the moon actually gets more sunlight. What, Farrah?
Say, think of DreamWorks. That's the moon you see.
Yeah.
Is it on the right or the left?
It's on the right.
Oh, it's on the right. Okay, good. All right. So the dark side of the moon, which I prefer to call the far side of the moon or the back side of the moon, it was first seen, actually photographed, by a Russian probe during the space race in the 50s, 1959. They got about a third of the surface photographed of the back side of the moon. I've never looked at them a lot. I do know that it actually looks very different, and scientists aren't always sure why. It looks really different. Yes?
Well, have you heard the book Earth in the Beginning?
No.
Eric Skousen wrote a book called Earth in the Beginning.
Okay.
It is it should be in everybody's
Really?
library.
Good astronomy stuff?
Yes.
Okay.
It
Do we
has,
have it?
It has
I think I've seen it on the
Abraham
shelf.
and Genesis and Moses done in parallel, so you can see the difference between
Oh, cool.
and Earth and everything, which is really cool. But they have an entire chapter in that book on the synchronous orbit of the moon and the Earth, and that if the moon was not in synchronous orbit with the Earth, so that we only saw the one side, that causes a gentle light reflection. In other words, if it wasn't in synchronous orbit and it was rotating and we could see both sides of the moon instead of only one side as it rotates with us, always showing us the same side, all life on Earth would be destroyed.
Interesting.
God did that on purpose.
Yeah. I
And
think
they
he does a lot
also
of things
have
on
a whole
purpose.
chapter in that book on how, astronomically speaking, the only way the orbits of the moon and the Earth and everything could happen is if the Earth was falling through space and the moon caught the Earth. We like to think that the Earth caught the moon. the moon caught the earth.
Interesting.
It's
Interesting.
super good
Sounds like a
book.
good book.
Earth in the beginning.
Cool. All right.
Erickson.
Thousands are about good stuff. Okay, so let's talk about the moon in books and movies. Picture books often show the moon. How often do they show the moon correctly? And how many different ways can they show it wrong? Let's find out. So it's time for you to turn on your thinking caps. Help me figure out some of these are right, some of these are wrong. Lots of different ways the wrong ones are wrong. Here's your first one. Quiz question number 1. This is a picture from a book called Guess How Much I Love You. It says, oh, actually, hold on. I want to say one more thing. Actually, a few more things. Okay, so it's funny. I just want to mention, I gave a talk at the Restoration Tour conference a few weeks ago, and I had a bunch of picture books in there too. I just thought it was funny. It's like, oh, there's the mom again, incorporating kids' books in her talk. So I want to be fair. When I criticize a moon for being illustrated wrong, I am not talking about creative license. I'm not talking about being cute. Okay, if there's a crescent moon with a person sitting in it, we all know that's just fun. Okay, it's not trying to be right. It's just being cute. All right. If there's a full moon with like a cartoony face, I'm not talking about that either. I'm not talking about someone swinging from a rope tied to the moon. Like we all know that's not true. I'm talking about the moon being used to help set a scene, okay? I'm talking about, it's bedtime. There's a moon up in the sky helping the kid you're reading the book to feel like it's time to go to bed. Oops, they put a morning moon in the sky instead. It's supposed to be an evening moon, That's the most common. I notice the moon in picture books all the time. Picture books, from seriously, I've read so many picture books. I have only seen the full moon and the crescent moon. I've never seen a quarter moon. I've never seen a gibbous moon. Quarter is in like half lit. I've never seen a gibbous moon, not once. I would love it if you would show me. But so we're talking full moons, crescent moons. That's really all we're gonna have as in my examples today, okay? Also, in my observation, ever since I learned about the moon, became a mom, started reading picture books, it seems to me that it is wrong more than it is right. It could be that I'm just not noticing all the right ones. I'm only like irked by the wrong ones. But I asked Zoe to help me collect pictures for the slideshow. And so she looked at, I don't even know how many hundreds of pictures. Zoe, you tell us. Was it wrong more than right?
As far as Christmas go, yes. There
Okay.
are a lot of full moons, and those are
Full moons are a lot safer. We'll get to that, yeah. Because full moons are always at night, yeah.
it's like when a 3-year-old, they get dressed and they get everything backwards. They get their shirt backwards, the pants backwards, the shoes on the wrong feet. They like, it's just like 50-50 chance of you getting it right. Maybe right half the time, but still the dog.
I'm going to repeat what Zoe said for the sake of the video. Were you done? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, you'd think if the illustrators were just like guessing and just like drawing a crescent moon, they'd get it right about half the time. Yeah, you'd think that about a 3-year-old getting dressed too. Like you'd think they'd like get half the time they get their shoes on the correct feet. They don't. At least my 3-year-old doesn't. The other day, I am not kidding. Her shirt was on backwards. Her underwear was on backwards. Pants were on backwards. Her shoes were on the wrong feet. I couldn't tell if her socks were on the wrong feet. They probably were too. Anyways. Okay, so here's your first example. Okay, so we're only going to look at ones that really ought to be, we can tell the time of day it's supposed to be. If there's an owl with a crescent moon, like the owls are up all night. Like you don't know if it's evening or morning. Okay, but this is, in this story, Guess How Much I Love You, the mother hare is putting little nut brown hare to bed. Okay, that's very far, thought little nut brown hare. He was almost too sleepy to think anymore. Then he looked beyond the thorn bushes, out into the big dark night. Nothing could be farther than the sky. Because she says, like, I'll love you to the moon and back or something. And here's the moon. What's wrong with that? Hey, so you have to consider that. But the story starts out when the sun is up. The story starts out when the sun is up, and it goes, and the moon comes out, the sun sets, it gets dark, they get tired, and here's a left lit crescent moon. They're in the southern hemisphere. It must be that.
Nothing can be farther than the sky except
What
for
type of
cloud
rabbits
behind
are
it.
those?
Oh, I didn't even put that in the thing. Oh, now I'm embarrassed. Shoot. Hold on. Just a second. Just a second. I gotta add that.
You know how rabbit it is?
What kind of rabbit it is? Oops. Okay, so there's two mistakes in this one. It's a left side crescent in the evening, and
Maybe that was a frisbee with light on the left side.
Yeah.
there are clouds behind the moon. That's crazy. All right. Gotta share my screen. Oh no, not that one. Oops. Sorry, it's so complicated. This one. I don't know what to do with that, Joshua. It's not on the screen.
Wiggle it around. It was on.
Look at my screen.
There it is.
Oh, I see. Okay. Great. Wonderful.
Even in the southern hemisphere.
Okay,
clouds
okay,
are
okay.
everywhere.
Here we go. Here we go. Oh, and that looks like the projector got bumped a little. Okay, wow, I missed that one. Okay, so there's actually two mistakes in this one. It's left side crescent in the evening, and there are clouds behind the moon. That's funny. So some of these have like animals wearing clothes and stuff. I will leave that up to the biologist. I'm the astronomer, so that can be for a different presentation. All right, let's look at another one. Let's look at another one. So this is from, it's so disappointing. This is actually from an astronomy book. So I have the book right here. It's called A Child's Introduction to the Night Sky. And it's actually teaching astronomy. It's not just a picture book. So this is terrifying, okay? And it makes them lose so much credibility. Oh, I guess I gave it away. Obviously, there's something wrong with it. But what's wrong with it? Can you spot what's wrong with it?
Sideways.
It's, you know, it's fine for it to be, it's fine for it to be lit up on the bottom, because the moon has a 5 degree difference from the sun's spot in the sky. So the bottom's fine. That's not the problem. It's, yes, exactly. This is 4 days into the cycle and it's lit up on the top left. That should be at the very end of the cycle. It has the entire cycle in the wrong order. It should be 4 days here, first quarter here, 10 days here. You see, the whole thing is completely wrong order.
They got full, right?
They got the full moon right. That's good. That's what I say. The full moon is the safe one. That's the safe one. Yeah, broken clock is right twice a day. Exactly. The new moon, that's fine. Well, they mean like the dark moon, the astronomical. Yeah, the new moon's right. The new moon's right. Full moon's right. Yeah. So if you don't know what you're doing, go with the no moon. That's good. Go with no moon at all. Yes. Okay. Isn't that terrifying? I think that's just a very bad mistake in an astronomy book, no less. So the mistake is the phases are in the wrong order. Even in the southern hemisphere, correct. This is not a hemisphere thing. Yes, because the sun sets and then the moon sets. It's not going to be lit on the top. It's going to be lit on the bottom, even if it's the bottom left, because you're in the southern hemisphere. It's still on the bottom, correct. Exactly.
So Charlotte, I'm really glad you're doing this because the moon has been something I've always been interested in. But
Yeah.
It's been so hard for me to absorb like the learning of it.
Yeah.
And I can see why.
Yeah.
Like it's just so.
Yeah, it's not that hard. It's not that hard. It's just like this gap in everybody's education, but it's not because we're dumb. It's just because it's not. It's like everybody can name the planets in order. Of what use is that? You can't even see them in the sky. And when you do see planets in the sky, they're not in order. You know what I'm saying? Like this to me is a more important astronomy for every day, you know, for everybody to learn. Okay, here's another one. This is from one of my favorite books called Bears in the Night. What do you guys think?
Mom and Dad are gonna bust them
Pretty
apart.
late.
Is that supposed to be?
I think that's a dark
Give me a
day.
drink of water. What'd you say? Okay, no, so this isn't the evening. So Mama Bear just put all the cubs to bed, and they hear this sound outside. Woo, woo. So they're gonna go investigate. So they take the lantern, and Mama's just down there knitting, doing her thing before she goes to bed, and they sneak out the window, and they're gonna go find whatever's making that sound. And they find it. It's a really cute story.
This one doesn't seem to
We'll
be
have
that
story
wrong.
time after this. This one doesn't seem to be that wrong.
It's too far up.
Okay.
Look, it has a 5 degree.
No, right. So that's why it's sometimes on the side, sometimes on the bottom, but how could it ever be on the top? See how it's a little too much on the top. Okay.
The right side of the moon is facing the sun. So if you look at the right side of that moon, that means the sun is up there. And
That is correct. The sun is way up here somewhere. Right. Use logic. If the moon is lit on this side,
Bisect the horn.
yeah, if the moon is lit on this side, it means the sun is somewhere over here. That is not evening. That is a daytime. Okay, but
The sky looks like that though.
yeah, it actually kind of does.
So they don't really do that.
Actually, it's funny because in the book, they don't all look that bad. Some of them are totally fine. So you read it like, oh, it's a right side crescent, kind of bad. Let's add one more piece, which is the cover of the book.
Yeah.
It's on the moon.
It's on the wrong side.
Oh, that's not doing anything. It's over here, right underneath the red, right there. Can you see it?
Yeah. It's on the right.
Lower than the
That's it.
ground.
No, that's not.
That's-
It's not lower than that. It's flipped.
Yeah, I can see
It's flipped. Yeah, the moon can't flip in one night. So that's, I would call that a mistake too for the cover. Looks like it just did. All right, so I would say this one actually has two mistakes. The cover shows a different phase than the inside of the book, and the moon is lit on the top right instead of bottom right.
It was up for a very long time.
No, they come back and get in bed and it's still dark. They don't last that long. Would you, as a kid, sneaking out? For a month. Oh, that long. Oh, I see. Oh, yeah. How long would that be? Like 3 weeks or something? To get from the waxing crescent to the waning crescent has got to be like 3 weeks. All right. All right. So the moon's consistent pretty much throughout the book, but the cover is bad. Okay. Here's another one. So this is actually from a movie. This is from a movie, Leap, which is a fantastic movie. Highly recommended if you're 5 years old. Okay. And if you're not 5 years old, at least watch it with a 5-year-old so you can enjoy the ridiculousness together. It's just totally ridiculous. All right, here's a screenshot from it. The kids are running away from an orphanage and literally being chased. That's like the first part. I'm like, why would they get chased? Never mind. We won't get into the rest of the movie. Okay, so you see the moon. So where's the moon at? In its cycle. Sorry, I'm blocking it for you guys.
Is that the beginning of the day?
That's this is a waning crescent moon, which means where's the sun? It's over here, right? It's like gonna rise soon. So it's morning. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Actually, I kind of liked it when I saw it because I was like, they've been like trying to escape from the orphanage all night. Like they met after all the adults had gone to bed and they tried all these things. They tried flying. Oh, here we go. They tried flying and they did all this stuff. They got chased for a while. They walked and caught a train. They did all this stuff. So when this moon popped up, I was like, oh, that's perfect. That actually shows the time of day it probably would be at this point in the story, okay? Here is a screenshot from the very next night. Very next night. So what's the problem? That was a very fast month. So this wouldn't be a full month. So this one's a waning crescent. So you're like a few days from the dark moon. And then here it would be a few days after the dark moon. So maybe a week, definitely not one night, right? You got to at least have the dark moon in between. So it's way too fast move through its phases. Okay, you see what you can do? So with the other one, this would, to go from, what were we saying? To go from waxing crescent to waning crescent takes like 3 weeks, but then to go the other way only takes, not the other way, but to finish the cycle and start it again would take like 1 week. All right. Here's another one. This is from a book called Good Night Gorilla. You know it. Oh, it's cute. So the zookeeper's saying goodnight to all the animals, and they follow him home and they get in bed with him, and then his wife has to tuck them all back into bed. It's cute. So how's this one? How's this moon? They're in the southern hemisphere again because it's lit up on the left. Maybe that's it. I don't know. Given that 90% of the Earth's population lives in the northern hemisphere, 90%, that is correct. And it's a zoo.
Oh, it's a zoo.
That's right. It's a zoo. All right. So some of these, maybe you can go, oh, I don't know. Maybe it's just the southern hemisphere. But yeah, this is once again left side crescent in the evening. All right.
Maybe it's like 5 o'clock in the morning.
No, it's not. It's not. He's saying goodnight and he's going home to bed. The zoo's open. All right, here's another one. So this is from a very charming book called Dad Mine. There's also a Mom Mine, two of my favorite. They're little board books. I have them memorized. So here's Dad Night. Left side crescent. Is that the problem? Is there a problem? Because the moon's going to be up. So the owl doesn't tell you anything because it's up all night, right? So that could be in the morning. So you figured out, what's your name? I haven't met you. Peter? Oh, okay. Peter Jr.? No, we've met before. Oh,
Yeah,
we met before. Oh, yeah. You're Alan's son. Okay, cool. Okay. He said something about there being a firefly right here. Yes.
And how is the move? How is this up and the bottom of the moon?
That's not my problem with it. So this one, my problem is that even though the moon's not lit up, it's still there.
Yeah.
You can't see stars through the moon. Yeah.
Yeah,
So this is like the illustration I showed you a little bit ago from this book. I mean, it was in the PowerPoint, but from the book, it had the star disappearing as it approaches that dark, non-illuminated part of the moon. But this just has the star right there, like that other book had the clouds behind the moon. What's that?
Somebody with a flashlight.
It looks, I don't know if you, it looks like a star to me. I don't know. Maybe that's what it is. I still love these books, by the way. I don't go through my books and get rid of them when they have the moon wrong. It's just a good education, you know? My kids, like, they're not even able to read these books without, like, spotting it. I'm spoiling all the books for them. All right. So the mistake I would say is the star appears where the unlit part of the moon is and would be blocking actual stars. Okay, here's another example. This is another huge disappointment because it's from a book that's actually trying to teach about the moon. This is my son's homeschool math book. It's Fred Math. It's the Life of Fred Goldfish. So the book's all about this boy named Fred who falls in love with the concept of having a fish as a pet. But after about 10 minutes, Fred's interest in the fish began to wane. So it's like, let's teach you what the word wane means. He could make it sit, or he couldn't make it sit or fetch like a dog. It wouldn't come when he called it. If fish were a cat, Fred could have picked him up and petted him, but fish was a fish. He pushed the plastic bag to a far corner of his desk. Fred's interest in fish was like a waning moon. And so then he draws a waning moon to teach you waning. The moon's getting smaller. What's wrong with that? And the book takes place in Kansas. It's not a Southern Hemisphere thing, correct? Yes, Kansas is all throughout all the Fred stories. So do you all see it? Gabby, do you see it? Yeah, moon's wane on the left, correct. So the mistake is the moon is waning towards the right. Yes.
Have you considered contacting the author?
I am going to email him. So he has his email address. He says he wants to know if you find any mistakes. And I'm going to. I'm collecting the mistakes I found in his books. Kyle and I are doing these books. How many have we done? 20? And I found 3 mistakes. So they're very good books. I really love the books. I love how they teach vocabulary as they go. They teach biology. They teach stuff about just so many life lessons and stuff. That's why I love it. But I'm an astronomer, so this is no good. All right. Let's look at another one. So this one, I think I might have brought it. Oh, no, I didn't bring this one. So this one is a book called Follow the Drinking Gourd. It's a story about a man who helped slaves escape to the north by teaching them to follow the Big Dipper, which is in the north. Of course you know it's in the north. It points at the North Star, correct? So he sang them this song and taught them secretly the path to the Underground Railroad. And here are some slaves successfully escaping by following the drinking gourd right there. Now it's a full moon, so it should be safe, right? Full moon at night, nothing wrong with that. It's risky to have anything but a full moon. And it's also, what's that? Yeah, it's also risky to have the moon by any constellations. So the sun, there are 88 modern day constellations, and the sun only moves through 13 of them. Sort of 12, sort of 13. It's like the months in a year, sort of 12, sort of 13. Or like the tribes of Israel, sort of 12, sort of 13. The sun only moves through about a dozen or a baker's dozen of them. Okay, so you can't just draw the sun by any old constellation you want. The moon is pretty close to the sun in the sky. Within 5 degrees, it's always pretty close to the equator. It's like in the tropics, give or take 5 degrees. So you can't draw the moon by the Big Dipper. The moon, the Big Dipper is here. When I go out and stargaze, that's where I look for the Big Dipper. The moon is never that way. The moon's always that way, so.
The moon only moves through the zodiac.
The moon also only moves through the zodiac, give or take that 5 degree thing. So 5 degrees, I keep saying 5 degrees. 5 degrees is about in the sky. If you hold your arms straight out and you hold up these 3 fingers, that is 5 degrees. 5 degrees is actually, I believe it's the distance between those 2 stars right there is 5 degrees. So the moon also only moves through those same constellations, but because of that wiggle, it might sometimes touch other ones. I don't know.
So Charlotte, what constellation in the Mazzaroth would be the closest to the opponent's star?
In the Mazzaroth?
The zodiac.
The closest, they're all really far from it. Which one would be the closest? I mean, because the North Star is like up here. I can look at my book here. Let's see. So the Big Dipper, I would say is closest. I would say it's closest to Leo. Oh, closest to the North Star. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said to the Big Dipper. I mean, they're all like equally. Well, they're not all equally distant because of the tilt of the Earth, right? So it's probably gonna be Gemini.
Okay, so yeah, what is sign?
Gemini or maybe Taurus.
So zodiac means path of the sun, path of the planet, path of the moon. So what I'm saying is, I'm trying to draw in my head the circle of the zodiac,
Yeah.
the planets. I'm trying to put the Big Dipper in this picture. Where does it go?
So yeah, the big here. You photos there. I'm gonna go on with the presentation. All right. So I would say the moon is way too far north. Way too far north. So it's risky to have, so if you want to be safe, full moon, no constellations, just stars are fine. No specific constellations. All right. Okay, here's another one. This is from one of my favorite Mother Goose books called My Very First Mother Goose. And like I said, we're not going to talk about the fact that animals are driving a car or wearing clothes. Leave that to the biologists. I'm just looking at the moon here. So here's the little moon right there. So this says, how many miles to grandma's house is how we say it. When we lived in Tooele is how we said it. How many miles to grandma's house? 70. Can I get there by car headlight? Yes, and back again. Open the garage as wide as the sky and let Baba and his girls pass by. I don't know if I've ever told you that before. These are my parents, by the way. They came to hear me teach. Okay, so here's the moon. So the king is, or does it say, yeah, the king and his men are traveling to Babylon by candlelight. So it's nighttime. It's pretty far though, so maybe they didn't show up till morning. I don't know. So I'm not going to be particular about the time of day that the moon is in. So does this one have any mistake or not? Okay, yeah. So Andrew said it. So look at the moon. I don't know if you can see it, but it's this sort of shape. So if you think about where that means the sun is up in this direction. So it's blazing daytime, but the sky is dark.
And they travel by
Well, maybe, yeah, maybe they traveled by candlelight and now the sun is up and they've arrived. I'm gonna go with the sky being dark. So yes, this one is another mistake. See how many different mistakes you can make? It's amazing. So this one, the moon is setting the scene for the middle of the day, but the sky is dark. Okay? Okay. Here's another one. This is from a cute little book. No, this is fine. Don't worry. This is from a cute little book called The Going to Bed book. And it's by an author named Sandra Boynton, who also wrote the book But Not the Hippopotamus. We really got to have story time. If you haven't read But Not the Hippopotamus, you really should. It's so funny. She's very, very funny. All right, so here are the animals. They're on a ship and they're getting ready for bed, and they just all went up to exercise, and it has the moon. So is this good?
Yeah.
Looks good.
Yeah.
Let's go back one page. With some on top and some beneath, they brush and brush and brush their teeth. And when the moon is on the rise, they all go up to exercise. The moon is on the rise. Does that look like a rising moon to you? Let's say we were in the southern hemisphere and it was a rising moon. Wouldn't that mean the sun is right behind it? Yeah, and so it's like morning time, yeah. So that's the problem. And then here's the next page. Actually, I don't know if it's the next page, but it's the next page I wanted to show. The moon is high. The sea is deep. They rock and rock and rock to sleep. If only it was a full moon, it would be just fine. But there are two mistakes. The waxing crescent moon is rising at bedtime in the wrong direction. So, right? Waxing crescent moons don't rise like that. All right. Are you guys getting tired of these? I have more. Okay. Let's go to, I wanted to mention a book that it didn't have a picture, but it had a story. It was a similar problem to this. You guys know Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim? I don't think it was the original. I think it was one of the sequels. But in it, it has a description, not an illustration, and it has the new moon rising. And it also says that in a couple of days, the moon will be full. Anyway, so I admit the moon is complex. But guess what? You don't have to write about it. You know what I mean? These mistakes are as bad as if you wrote a story in which the sun rose in the north. Or if you said that the stars were visible. You know, you showed a picture with the sun up and the stars visible at the same time. Or if the sun switched directions midday or something. Or if you had the sun passing through a constellation not in the zodiac. I mean, that's what is happening here. Like the moon is a lot more fixed than we realize if we don't learn about it. Okay, here's wee Willie Winky runs through the town, upstairs and downstairs in his nightgown, rapping at the window, crying through the lock. Are the children all in bed? For now it's 8 o'clock. Bedtime. It's evening. This is from that same book again as the Miles to Babylon one.
I mean, that says the sun is still up. I mean, it's literally to the right of it.
I'm gonna say this one doesn't have any mistakes. Any little budget, you know, it's fine. Now, Zoe pointed out to me that there is a little tiny waning crescent moon in the W, so it does have like both kinds of crescent. I don't know if they were trying to be safe or just cute. I don't know. But anyway, so here's one that has actually no mistake in the illustration. And that seems to be about as frequent as it happens. Although, like I say, I probably just don't notice all the time. There was something else. There was a book I decided not to show, but it had the moon very big in the sky. The moon is actually not that big. If you ever looked at it, it's actually, if you hold your hand out, like I was showing, it's actually smaller than your pinky. Smaller than a dime in the sky, called at arm's length. It's not really that big. So, but sometimes the books show that the moon is big as the window. like as a big, yeah, it's like, but that's, I don't know. I decided not to include that because it is, sometimes it seems that big maybe. All right, here's the next one. Good night, moon. Any comments?
The cows jumping over a
Sorry, this is just an actual scan of our board book copy that's like really dinged up. So this white, that's just a scratch. Sorry, I should have maybe pulled the image off Amazon or something instead. It's like, look at the edges, it's just falling apart. It's a favorite in our house. Okay. So yeah, I'm gonna say this one doesn't have any mistake. It shows the full moon at night. And then the picture on the wall has the cow jumping over a new moon. You know, that could be, it is a new moon, but the cow could jump over an old moon. I don't care. So that doesn't really tell you anything. So the full moon is the safest. But here's the thing. When you're illustrating a children's book, the full moon runs the risk of looking like the sun, because it's a fully lit circle, and you lose that nice crescent shape. So you should just know what you're doing. And you need to know what you're doing, not just if you're an illustrator, but also if you're an editor. Because like I learned, I've done high school yearbook newspaper, I've edited lots of stuff. Sometimes you want to flip images because, for instance, you want the action to be going towards the page you're about to turn. And so you're going to flip an image. You have to be careful if there's a moon in there. Zoe and I discovered that the hard way because she was the one editing these pictures for me. And a couple of them got flipped and I was like, wait, I thought this was a bad example, but it looks like a good example. And so we were like, oh, so I think she flipped the picture anyway. Instead of, so like she scanned it in upside down and instead of rotating it, she flipped it. So then the moon, we couldn't use it as a bad example. Anyway, so you have to know what you're doing, even if you're not an artist. All right, so let's give some reasons why to pay attention to the moon, okay? You can avoid drawing incorrect pictures and writing bad descriptions. Also avoid being a bad editor, like I said, okay? You can observe the new moons as one of the Bible's appointed times. If you're already keeping Shabbat and keeping the feasts, then this is a natural next step for you to try to keep as many commandments as you're able to. Next reason, you can find more meaning when you read the scriptures. There are lots of scriptures that talk about the lights in the heaven or make reference to astronomy. Joshua showed us only some of the scriptures that talk specifically about moons and months. And so if you understand the moon, then you can better understand those scriptures. You can also study the events in the scriptures, whether or not the actual date is given. So Farrell Pickering, my friend here, he gave a lecture a few weeks ago at the Restoration Tour Conference, and he went into all this stuff about the date of Christ's birth based on, you know, all the scriptures that talk about it and what was happening in history, certain eclipses and things happening. So it helps to be able to talk about those things. And we also, not yesterday, but the last 2 Sundays, our friend Brian Weaver has come and has talked about things he's learned about the Star of Bethlehem and the Annunciation and the crucifixion and all that stuff. And so it definitely helps in your study of those events. You can also discover significant dates in church history, like Joshua has done. He looked up and discovered that Joseph Smith got the golden plates on Yom Kippur, on the Feast of Trumpets. And I think that's really cool and very meaningful. It wasn't your discovery? Well, that's fine. You mentioned that it is what happened, whether it was your discovery or not, that's fine. Here's another reason. You guys all know I love to stargaze. If you know where the moon is at and what it's doing, you can know the best times are to stargaze. So you want to stargaze probably when it's not a full moon, right? And stargazing has its own whole long list of reasons for doing it. So ask me sometime if you don't think it's worth it. I won't get into it right now. Okay, next, you can appreciate the beauty of the world that Heavenly Father created, and you can be more in touch with it. Because when you understand what you're seeing, you can love it more. It's like any subject. You learn about human anatomy. How does human anatomy, the study of human anatomy, not make you even more in awe of Heavenly Father? You know what I mean? I was that way with mathematics. I have a degree in mathematics, and it was like, there are certain things that just blew my mind. I was like, wow, this is so amazing. Like, how can you, I just think, what a shame what a shame for the atheist. I don't know who to give the credit to if I'm an atheist for all these beautiful things in every subject of study. All subjects are worth studying, and in particular, actual nature. And you can feel more humble. Here's a scripture from Psalm chapter 8. When I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him, and the son of man that thou visitest him? Enough said about that. That's why I wanted to sing that hymn before we started. All right. Let's talk about what the moon looks like during the feast. So Joshua talked about the specific calendar days that the feasts fall on, and the feasts that fall on specific days of the month are going to always be at the same part of the moon. So let's talk about that for a second. So there's a couple feasts that are not fixed to a monthly date, so they're not interesting in context of the moon. And there's a couple of optional, and by that I mean not commanded feasts. So you got Hanukkah and Purim. You can keep them if you want. They're not commanded. So Hanukkah starts on the 25th day of the month, and it lasts 8 days. And so that means it starts in a waning crescent, and the 8 days of Hanukkah always have a new moon. The Purim starts on the 14th day of the month, so that's approximately at a full moon. Nothing in the scriptures that I know of is defined by a full moon, but since the moon cycle is 29 or 30 days, then at 14 or 15 days in, it's going to be a full moon. So Purim is at about a full moon, give or take a day. Let's talk about the spring feast. So Passover is on the 14th day of the month, so it's always approximately at a full moon. And then the Feast of Unleavened Bread is on the 15th of the month, lasting 7 days. So it begins also at approximately full moon and ends at about last quarter. And the fall feasts include the Feast of Trumpets, also known as Yom Teruah or Rosh Hashanah, on the first day of the month. This always happens on a new moon. I think the first time as a family we observed the new moon, it was on Yom Teruah. Do you remember that? I think it was, like probably about 3 years ago. Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, is on the 10th day of the month, so that's a waxing gibbous moon. And the Feast of Tabernacles, also known as Sukkot or Booths, starts on the 15th day of the month and lasts 8 days. So that means it begins at about a full moon and ends with a waning crescent moon. And I think that's terribly convenient when you're going camping. I love it when there's a full moon when I'm camping, because then you're not totally tied to your flashlight all the time. So that's nice. Sukkot's always going to start at a full moon and end, 8 days later. Okay, let's talk a little more. Joshua talked a lot about calendar, but I want to talk a little more about the difference between the rabbinical calendar and one based on moon observations. So the rabbis use that repeating calendar on a 19-year cycle, and the months simply alternate between 29 and 30 days, since the moon cycle is 29 and a half days. Okay, the rabbinical calendar, it does not actually observe the new moons. And they don't use, and when I say observe, I mean they don't go out and look at the moon, and they don't use astronomy software to predict when it could be observed, okay? They just repeat the same. It's like the first month has the same number of days every single year. So this makes the feasts on the rabbinical calendar fall on slightly different dates than the calendars actually based on the new moons. So if you use the holiday calendar that the Zarahemla Foundation puts out, the dates are going to be slightly different from the rabbinical sometimes. So for instance, we had, well, actually, I don't know if this is a moon thing, so I won't even mention it. But anyway, so when you look it up on Google, that's going to be the rabbinical one. It's the most common version of the Hebrew calendar. It might not match up with what we're doing if they're celebrating together. So I just wanted to mention that. Okay, what's the difference between a regular calendar, like your run-of-the-mill wall calendar, and one based on moons observations? I mentioned this before, but run-of-the-mill calendars include the astronomical new moons, not the visible new moon. So if you want to know when the visible new moon is, it's going to be 1 to 2 days after the dark moon. And but besides the new moon, all the other phases of the moon are the same. So if it has the first quarter mark, it's the same as the Hebrew calendar, which doesn't actually do anything with that, I guess. So if you're interested in observing the new moon, there are lots of different ways to do it. The first and most recommended is to just pay attention to the entire cycle of the moon, and you'll soon get a feel for when the new moon is coming, okay? Another option is to look up when the astronomical new moon is and just assume that the visible new moon is the following day. Is it getting dimmer or is it okay? but the computer's making it do it.
Yeah.
Ugh.
That's your.
That's my sunset sign. That means the sun is setting. I better hurry so we can go out and look at the moon. Okay. My third tip is to use our holiday calendar. Another one is to use an atomic clock. So here's my atomic clock that shows. It's funny because on a digital clock, the black is the part that's like showing, you know, like the letters, the numbers are black. So when I first started using it, I was like, why is the new moon, it looks like a waning gibbous moon, but it's actually the moon. It's because you have to look at the black, not the white. But anyway, so that shows, so that's fun. I can keep track of the moon's cycle using that. Okay, really cool tool on timeanddate.com. I had it do this on purpose because we got to go look at it. I mean, we don't have to. When we go out, we'll be like, oh, we can't even see anything. Okay, but if you go to timeanddate.com, and you go to sun and moon, night sky, select object, and I could show you this later. I was hoping maybe I'd have time to show you. I'm not going to. Then you can tell it you want to track the moon, and it'll show you where the moon is in the sky and how visible it is. It's a really cool tool. Okay, you can subscribe to this email list called Deborah's Date Tree. So she's a woman who lives in Jerusalem and tries to observe the new moon and asks people to help her observe the new moon in Jerusalem, or at least in Israel, every month, because she wants to follow the months based on the new moons. And so she has an email that goes out every month, the day before the new moon, and then another email that goes out on the day of the new moon. You can see whether they observed the new moon or not. So this month they did observe it today. They're 9 hours ahead of us, so they observed it 9 hours ago. But last month they couldn't observe it, but we did. And one reason might be because they had like a dust storm or something, so they couldn't actually see the sky. But an actual valid reason for why they might not be able to see the new moon, but we would be able to, is because of that 9 hour time zone difference. Because remember, the sun is going faster than the moon. So if they can't see it because it's too dim, it's too close to the sun, 9 hours later, they'll have separated a little bit and maybe we'll be able to observe it and they can't. So I like reading those emails, but I don't count on them. I want to go see it for myself. Okay. And then another tip is to use other astronomy software or another astronomy website. I'm not really familiar with that many. I've got enough on my plate with books and the actual sky, so I don't use like the software Brian Weaver uses or the one that Farrell uses, but there's a lot of good ones out there. So there's lots of different ways to observe the new moon if you want to. Okay, done, the end. Let's go outside.